Hey folks, Professor K here. So now that we've learned more about how layers can interact with each other in Photoshop, as well as how to select things and how to change the way a photo looks through photo manipulation tools, now it's time to start getting into more advanced techniques for selecting and masking things so that we can do a good job of putting different photos together in a realistic way. These techniques can be used for really cool effects both creatively and when you're trying to create a realistic situation that you can't shoot in a photo shoot. However, I will say that good photo manipulation is really hard and it takes real skill to do. So, although I'm going to teach you these techniques and show you these techniques, it's going to take you a lot of practice to be able to get a photo composite together that looks realistic to the eye. And I'll show you some of those tricks and also where I even have trouble with this in our next video. For now, let's focus on the most important tool you will use in Photoshop, layer masks. Let's get started. All right, so today we're talking about layer masks. Now, to demonstrate what a layer mask does, you may remember this quickly from one of the first videos that we watched on Photoshop. Layer masks allow you to use black, white, and all shades of gray in between to show or hide a photo. This is a little bit of a weird idea, but I promise it will make sense. Let me show you quickly how these things work together and how you can use this to quickly mask the background out of an image. Here we have a bedroom photo, and in my downloads, I have selected this rabbit photo, and I want to try and put these together. Now, this is going to be a challenge for a number of reasons. Although these look like they're shot at relatively the same level, I can see we're shooting just a little bit above the rabbit, and this is maybe a little bit more horizontal, so that's one thing we're going to have to deal with here. But overall, roughly the same angle of camera. I can see right now that the toning on this rabbit versus the bedroom photo is a lot different. So we're going to have some color challenges. We're going to address those in the next video, but for right now, I just want to show you by placing this using my return key how you can quickly mask out the rabbit using a layer mask. Let's use some of the selection tools we learned earlier in our earlier videos. In the fourth tool down in the toolbox, we're going to use the Object Selection tool. This is going to allow us to select the rabbit quickly. Make sure that you're on the correct layer, this rabbit here, and if you're following along, you can grab the links to the Unsplash images that I'm using in the description. Drag a selection over the rabbit and allow Photoshop to do its job here. Now, you're going to notice something. Right now, this selection is really rough, and it's not getting all of the little hairs and all of the little kind of nooks and crannies with the rabbit. You know what? We're not going to worry about it, because today we're going to use layer masks. And layer masks mean you can finagle and fiddle with all these little bits and pieces as much as you want, even after you're done selecting. Let's take a look at what that looks like. We're going to start by adding a layer mask. In your layers panel, down at the bottom, you are going to see a little icon that looks a lot like a camera. It says Add Layer Mask. Click that while this is selected with your little marching ants to add your first layer mask. And check that out. Now, instantly, let's repeat that. Command Z to undo, and then Shift Command Z to redo. See how, with that layer mask, the whole background disappeared? Now, because we didn't do the best job selecting this, there are some little odd bits and pieces here. So the beauty of a layer mask is that this little mask here, this black and white image, if you look really closely, you can see that this is almost like a little copy of the rabbit here. In fact, let's option click it and take a little bit closer look. That's exactly what it is. It's a little copy of the rabbit. And that little copy, that little painting there, is controlling what in the rabbit photo is showing and hiding. So let's use our brush tool. I'm going to hit B on the keyboard, but you can also go down in your toolbox to this tool right here underneath the patch tool, and then ensure that you are on the layer mask by clicking it. Now you have a brush, and again, remember that you can use the brackets on your keyboard to resize the brush quickly. I am going to try and get back some of the missing muzzle on this rabbit. The way that I'm going to do that is by using black and white on this layer mask to show and hide the rabbit. Now take a look at this layer mask and take a guess. Based on what you see in this layer mask, what color do you think shows the photo underneath it? If you guessed white, you're absolutely correct. White shows the photo, black hides it. Think of it like light. Light shows an object, shadow hides it. So here we are going to paint with light. We're going to show that rabbit using our brush. So here I am just using my brush tool to bring back the rabbit's snout. And now you can see there it is. I can change the hardness of this to make it a little bit more realistic and a little cleaner. And I can use X on my keyboard to switch between black and white. So notice over here, here's white and here's black. I'm going to hit X, and now notice it's switched to black on top and white on bottom. X will flip between the foreground and background color, and it's really handy when you're working on a layer mask like this to get those little bits and pieces right. So I'm just going to go back to black, bring down my brush tool, and kind of refine this edge all the way down here. And it looks just like I'm erasing this, right? But here's the kicker. If I ever want to get it back, I switch back to white and I brush it back in, and there you go. There's that rabbit image. It's coming back. I'm not actually erasing it. This is called non-destructive editing, and it's a really important tool in Photoshop, especially with photo manipulation, so that you don't lose data that you might want later on when you go to refine things. Now you might notice that this is kind of a pain in the butt. This is not the easiest way to select something, and you still have to go through and like really zoom in and just do a lot of cleanup work, and I'm still not getting the whiskers in here. It's just kind of overall not the best sort of selection, but it works. You know, it's a large but relatively reasonable looking rabbit in there. I've gotten it in there. The background's removed. Not too bad. And it was relatively quick. However, you can use layer masks to quickly select around the edges of both hair and fur really easily. And that's the trick I'm going to show you today, because this is where layer masks really get powerful, is in selecting stuff that Photoshop's just not very good at selecting. Let me demonstrate. Here we have a woman with beautiful hairdo, lots of really great stuff going on, and I've put her on this kind of like square background. Now, this is what the final photo looks like. But initially, what the photo looked like was this. Now imagine if I were to try and go through and select all of these little itty bitty hairs. Believe it or not, Photoshop is just not very good at this, no matter what you try to do. So let's try this. Let's see if we can select the subject using the object selection tool. So we're going to click select subject, and Photoshop's going to do its best job. In fact, it does a pretty decent job. But you can see that it gets some of the hair, but it misses a lot of just like the little details that we could have gotten otherwise. So when you're selecting things like hair, when you have to remove the background around somebody with these really fuzzy natural edges that are just really hard for you to go in and select and unselect, what you want to use is a layer mask. Here's the trick. What we're going to do is we're going to begin by adding a layer mask to this photo. Now, whenever you add a layer mask just like this, it's going to start out as white. Everything is showing. What we want to do is get a good kind of rough selection of her using this photo as our reference. So we're going to use a trick here, and we're going to go over to channels. Now, we haven't talked much about channels yet, but what channels allows you to do is see all of the different colors on a specific type of light. So here we have red, green, and blue. We don't need to know the technical details about this too much. We're going to just click and just follow along with this tutorial. Don't worry about understanding it fully yet. Worry about understanding the layer mask part of this. And then later on down the line, when you get into really advanced Photoshop stuff, you'll get a better sense of what channels are for. Here, we're going to click on red, and then green, and then blue. Our goal is to find the image with the most contrast between the background and the foreground, something that will allow us to get her silhouette really clearly. So when I take a look at this, I would say that's probably red. The red channel is what we want, because I can see there's a very clear distinction between the edges of her hair here and the edges of her body. Whereas with the green, although there's a lot more contrast, there's also a lot more contrast in her skin and her face. The end result we want is we want a silhouette of her. We want her to be all kind of darkened out and the background to be all light. So we're going to copy this image. We'll do that by hitting Command A and then Command C. Select all and copy. That copies this exact image right here. Let's hit back to RGB to return our image to normal. Deselect, Command D, and then go back to the layers palette. Here, we are going to select our layer mask, and then we're going to hit Option Click. That will put us in layer mask editing mode. Notice how the layer mask is selected, and we're also inside of Photoshop here, and we can see the layer mask. Now, if you could, do Command V and paste the image right into that layer mask. Let's take a break here and notice what's going on in our user interface. We have our photo and we have our layer mask. Remember that with layer masks, black removes the image, like darkness, right? Darkness doesn't allow you to see something, and light shines a light, allows you to see something. So what do you think is going to be revealed in the image here when we go back to the image and off of this layer mask? Let's break it down. Let's think about this. The lightest part of this mask will be revealed. The darkest part of this mask will be taken away. So what we'll see is the background will show and the woman here will be removed. Let's see if our theory is correct. Go ahead and click now back on the photo, and our theory was correct. You can see that the woman is transparent and the background is not. Let's test this theory by adding a new layer using this plus at the bottom and then dragging it underneath. And let's fill it with a color that's nice and bright. I'm going to click once on this and then change this to a bright red just so we can see what's going on. Using Option and Delete, I will fill this, and now we can see what's being masked out. All right, so we're halfway there. This is the opposite of what we want. In fact, what we could do is we could drag in our pattern here, scale it up just a little bit, and drag it underneath and see what's going on. This is the opposite effect of what we wanted. We want the background behind her to show through, and we want her to be on top of it. So the first thing we need to do is go back to our layer mask. We're going to edit this now. Edit it by selecting Option and clicking. And we want the opposite of this. We want the inverse of this. So do Command A, and then we're going to do Command I to invert it. That's going to flip the relationship between light and dark in this photo. Let's deselect and go back to check and see if we're closer to the image that we want. Going back to the image, this is closer. We're getting there. Now, a thing with layer masks that we haven't talked about yet is if black hides the image and white shows the image, darkness hides the subject, light shows the subject, what happens in between? What happens with your grays, your dark gray, your light gray? How does a layer mask handle grays? You can start to see how a layer mask handles grays here. What's happening is that the further towards the light end of the spectrum, just like with real light in real life, that you get, the more of the subject will be shown. The further towards the dark end of the spectrum, darker grays, blacks, the less of the subject will be shown. So every time we see dark here on this layer mask, less of the subject is shown. You can see this in the background, and notice this with the layer mask. I'm just going to Option click to get back in and edit it. Let's take a look at the difference between this dark area and this light area. Going back to our image, lots of the background shows through, not as much of the background shows through. So getting back to our layer mask, what can we do to make this contrast stronger? That's what we want, right? We want more of this photo to be in that light area and more of the darks of this photo to be in that dark area. So there's a much clearer distinction, and we get a cleaner image of the woman on top of the background. Option clicking back into the layer mask, let's do that by using something called levels. The levels feature in Photoshop allows you to change the way the levels of the darkness and lightness in a photo. You can get to this by using Command L. And each of these arrows represents blacks, midtones, and lights. So when you drag over the blacks to the middle, they get darker. When you drag the whites in towards the middle, they get lighter. Normally in photography, you don't want to do this kind of extreme editing because you lose a lot of the detail. In fact, you're seeing we're losing a lot of detail in this mask. But that's exactly what we want in this case. We want a silhouette of the woman so that it's very clearly masked out. So let's continue to just adjust this until we can see that we have dark and light pretty well masked out here. And we might get really, really extreme with this. What we want to be careful of is that we don't lose the complexity of the hairline or of the eyelashes. So just watch those little pieces, because as you drag in the dark here, that will start to happen. You'll start to lose some of those little details. Let's just assess where we're at here. Really pay attention to the edges here for now. Don't worry about this stuff in the middle. We'll clean that up in a moment. You really want to pay attention to the edges, which are going to be very hard for you to mask. That's the idea behind this technique, is to make your life just a little bit easier. I really like the look of this. Let's hit OK. And now let's check and see how we're doing. What effect did that have? Going back to the photo, look how much cleaner that is. You can see that a lot more of her face is showing. A lot of the background is much clearer. And what we have left are kind of these little bits and pieces where the background is still showing through, because in our layer mask, we still have grays there. So let's clean those up. You can either do that in this view or in the layer mask view, but I prefer to do it in the layer mask view because I just find it much easier to see where things might be showing through in the simplified view. What we're going to do now is we're going to paint white back into the silhouette so that we don't have that background showing in anymore. So hit the B button on your keyboard or select the brush from your toolbox. And again, get ready to increase the size of that brush, and let's just, whoops, I'm on black here. Let's hit X to reverse that, get on white, and this is really fuzzy. I want the hardness to be harder, so I'm going to take it up to like 94%. Something relatively, defined. And I'm just going to quickly go through and do my large brush strokes out in this view. I know for sure everything over here can be masked out. And again, remember that our goal is to make sure that none of the background is showing through her. So let's just select, zoom in, really get in there. And you don't have to get it perfect. One of the techniques we're going to learn here is that it's much easier to do this kind of work when you have photos that work well with each other. They have similar tones in them. So I'm going to get pretty close here, mostly because I'm a perfectionist. But when we go through in the background, I'm also going to adjust the tones so that everything has a very pinky tone and looks naturally good together. That's going to make this a little bit easier. Now I'm just going to go through, and we may find that this doesn't look as natural over here. And in that case, we can go back in and kind of nudge it around back in our layer view. But that's not too important right now. We're just going to try and get most of it. And what I think this will especially work well with is this area up here. It looks like it was really effective up there. And you'll find that this is just much faster. Even though this is taking a few minutes, this is much faster than trying to select this on your own using selection tools. This is probably the easiest way to get yourself a PNG out of a logo too. I've used this technique to remove white backgrounds from logos a lot. So when you're a professional designer and somebody goes and sends you this like awful tiny PNG that you have to get into Illustrator and somehow get the vector out of it, and you're like, oh my gosh, how do I just remove the white from this logo? This technique is going to be your best friend. All right, so let's return to our photo here. And this is nice and cleaned up. It looks relatively good. This is a little odd here, but we're not going to worry about it too much. I don't think it's too noticeable. If we wanted to, we could go back in and do some detail work on this layer mask and mask that out. In fact, I can just demonstrate that to you quick. You could grab in with your brush tool here and using the black and white, making sure you're on the layer mask, you could go through and hit X here and you could just mask this out. But when I look at that, that really stands out. So I'm actually going to leave that alone. It's such a small area that I don't think anybody's going to notice. Let's now do the final work on here and make sure that this woman and this background look really good together. Here, we're going to start by using our layer effects, and we're going to use this style to put on a color overlay. And since pink is my favorite color for this tutorial, we're going to use screen and just give this a really nice pinky feel. One thing that I notice, one thing that's catching my eye as I am working on this manipulation is that the background is much lighter than the foreground in this photo. And that's something that's really kind of drawing my eye and not looking as good as it could. So we're going to use a technique called adjustment masks here to adjust just this photo on top. Look for the little circle with a half moon around it, and then you're going to create a new adjustment layer using this menu. In this, we could use levels just like we did before, but I want to use curves this time just to show you what that's like. To make sure that this only applies to the photo, we're going to use one of the techniques we learned in our last video, clipping masks, to create a clipping mask and make sure it only applies to this photo so that we're not changing the background behind it. That's our goal here. Now, one thing that you'll notice is that when we click a layer, this properties panel above it changes. Whenever you're on an adjustment mask, you'll get that adjustment up in the properties panel. So much like the levels, you have a dark and a light over here. But instead of just having these little arrows to play with and squish things in and out, now we have a line. This is why it's called curves, because you can adjust different lights and darks in the photo without having to rely on just a certain range. So you can put a point anywhere in here and make it lighter or darker in order to make the photo look more realistic. So let's just try this. I want the midtones just to be a little bit brighter, and I want my shadows to be a bit brighter too. Maybe not that bright though. It's a little too bright. What would happen? Sometimes you just play with this, you know? Like you wouldn't want something like that that looks kind of funky. I don't want to wash out the blacks. Similarly, I don't want to make the lights too dark or too bright. So I'm really looking on this tone curve to kind of just make her a little bit brighter so that she matches this really bright look and feel in the background. And now you can see that we've gotten to a place where they're really starting to look good together. You could continue using some different effects to see if you can get each photo to look a little bit closer to each other. For example, this photo has a little bit of grain to it, whereas the photo behind it does not. So because we're on a smart object, which allows us to change the way our filters go, we could try a filter here and just see if it works. Let's try noise. Let's add noise and let's see how much we get. Maybe not that much, but let's kind of zoom in here and just take a look at how this is going. We'll add a little bit of noise, and we could do Gaussian or uniform. I like the look of uniform a little bit better. Just reduce it and hit OK. And you'll notice that we now have a smart filter with add noise below here. So you can turn this off, decide you don't want it anymore. No worries. All you have to do is click this eyeball, turn it on. Perfect. Now it's back. And with this, again, that's on that non-destructive photo editing track. You can decide where and when you want this noise as well, using what's this look like? Doesn't this look familiar? A layer mask. So you can see that these are the foundations of getting really detailed with your photo editing and really making things look cohesive together. Now I like the look of this noise. I'm also going to add just a little bit of blur using filter, blur, and then Gaussian blur and see how I like that. Maybe just 1 pixel. I just want to soften this a little bit. And let's see. Always make sure you check at 100% or 200% if you're on a high DPI mod or like I am. And let's just take out the Gaussian blur, put it back. I don't know, do I like it? I actually think I don't, because she's got like a lot of texture up in here, and I kind of want the background to have it too. So I'm actually going to leave it as is. That's looking pretty good. That's not bad. All right. So in our next video, now that you understand how layer masks work, I'm going to show you an effect that does the opposite and shows you how to use a layer mask to creatively mask out and show a concept while selecting a person and doing it really easily. So stay tuned. You'll see that in just a moment.